Good morning. This is Fair Media Council CEO and Executive Director Jackie Clement. Welcome to Day 3 of the news conference. Today, we focus on what to expect in the news this year with national and local news forecast panels designed to give you an exclusive sneak peek into the near future. To complete today's agenda, we explore why it is that Americans are so captivated by political news. The Fair Media Council advocates for quality news and works to create a media-savvy society. This event brings both sides of that mission to life. Many thanks to the incredibly talented speakers and moderators who are joining us from around the country. And to the sponsors that made this event possible, thank you to the good people at Northwell Health, Protiviti, Mount Sinai South Nassau, St. Joseph's College, Henry Schein, Hofstra University, the Bartol Law Firm, WSHU Public Radio, and Long Island Business News. Now let's get to it.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Star Fuentes, and I'm an aspiring multimedia journalist studying broadcast journalism at Five Counts College. And I'm one of the Fair Media Council student ambassadors here to introduce our first panel, 2021 National Forecast, People, Stories, and Issues to Watch, featuring senior Washington Correspondent Business Insider Dave Levinthal, Editorial Writer Bloomberg Opinion Robert George, Washington Bureau Chief, Newsday, Tom Brune, moderated by Managing Director and Marathon Strategies, Liz Benjamin. Don't forget, if you do post on social media, please use the hashtag FMCPower. Good morning, Liz.
Good morning. Thank you very much for your very kind introduction. I do want to say, and good luck, Star, I would say, in your aspirations. It's certainly a really exciting time to be a reporter and covering what's going on in the local, national, and international scene. I do want to say that it's great to be reunited with some of my former colleagues here. It's good to see all of you, gentlemen. And I think that the most obvious, when we're talking about the national landscape and what's to come in 2021, I think we have to address the obvious first, which is it's going to be the story of Joe Biden. I mean, quite clearly, and then subsequently, though, Joe Biden under the cloud of the hangover of the previous administration, which he can't seem to escape as a result of the impeachment process that's going to go forward. So I guess I'll start with you, Tom, and just say, what is it that you're expecting to see, and how long do we think this sort of Biden-Trump interchange is going to continue? I'm sure that the new president is probably tired of it already.
Well, that may be the case, but I think that Biden and most Democrats realize that Trump is here to stay, and I think that Trump is not going to go away. And that I think that it's going to be a counterpoint for the next 2 years.
Do you think how much is that going to be a problem, Dave, in terms of a challenge for reporters? I mean, what is the responsibility? Once we get past the impeachment trial, which of course is historic, it's the first time that you've had a president impeached twice. He's now no longer a president. So that's another sort of knot that we've seen, for example, Senator Paul bring up recently. But once that's over, I mean, what's the responsibility of reporters to split their time and allegiance in terms of covering what's currently happening in the White House, as opposed to what is going on in Florida with the shadow government that Donald Trump is trying to establish?
Well, foremost, there is going to be divided attention that's inescapable, and here's why. Of course, the Biden administration has a very ambitious agenda. There are going to be numerous different legislative proposals and priorities that it's already putting forward, everything from immigration to COVID relief to economic issues, environmental issues, and the list goes on, say nothing of dealing with ethics reforms that the House and the Senate very much want to put forward. But Donald Trump is not going away. He is not going away politically in the sense that he is entertaining the notion of running for re-election in 2024 rather, and reporters will need to cover that. He is entertaining the notion of starting potentially his own political party. He's created a new political action committee and is already causing trouble with that by doing polling against some of his Republican adversaries, not Democratic adversaries, Republican adversaries, like Liz Cheney, for example. And then Donald Trump faces this absolute crush of legal issues, separate and apart from what's going on with the impeachment trial, but issues that are criminal and civil in nature at the federal, the state, and the local level, and involving a whole variety of issues, from his administration to the phone call and election pressuring of officials in Georgia, his taxes, his business, you name it, it's going to be there. We've counted about a dozen different ways that Donald Trump faces points of legal peril. So that too, for reporters, is going to be an ongoing story. He's a former president of the United States. Half of America wanted him to be president of the United States again. So it would be journalistic malpractice, even as much as many people would like to see Donald Trump go away. It would be malpractice for journalists to simply say, we're not covering Donald Trump anymore.
And then, it really does. And then there's like the added wrinkle in addition, and Robert, will bring you in now. I mean, first of all, from a New York perspective, a lot of what Dave just mentioned is occurring in New York, right? You have the Manhattan DA, for example, who's very involved, the state attorney general, who's very involved, Tish James and Cy Vance, respectively, although apparently Mr. Vance may not be running for re-election. So that also is an added wrinkle, though he's not formally declared his intention. So, I mean, how does that, from a New York perspective, make things more difficult for the New York focus? Now, just to be clear, Donald Trump is no longer a resident of New York. He has, left the home state, and yet he still has an outsized personality and imprint on what happens here.
Right. I think you used the right word early on in your introduction when you referred to the hangover from the previous administration. I almost think it's that the former president should be like Voldemort. It's the name we shouldn't really mention because of all the pressure it's bringing on everybody. Donald Trump is still a New Yorker. As you said, the New York prosecutions are a major cloud over him, and it may be one of the few things that can actually temper him somewhat politically. As Dave and Tom said, nationally, Trump is not going away. We saw with the test impeachment vote, for want of a better phrase, this week, you had 45 Republican senators. Some of them said it was just for procedural reasons and so forth, but 45 of them basically said this thing is unconstitutional and we don't want to address it. Trumpism is as much of an ongoing problem as Trump the man himself. The Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz is planning a rally in Wyoming to attack Liz Cheney politically, because Liz Cheney was one of the 10 people who voted to impeach in the House. You've got Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene down in Georgia, who a number of her social media posts where she essentially approved of the assassination of Nancy Pelosi have come to light. So you're going to see tension in the House of trying to expel her, and how many Republicans will support her. So this hangover, whether it's in New York, whether it's in Florida, whether it's in Georgia, the legacy of Trump is going to be part of the conversation for this year and years going forward.
Well, and also we have seen some really troubling, and then at this point, I'll direct questions to you directly, but if you want to jump in, gentlemen, please just, it could be a free for all. It's fine. I can.
We're not shy, Liz. You
I
know
can
that.
be the referee. Well, I know you're not shy, sir. But so let's just also note. I mean, we saw some really troubling. We saw the vote, which was sort of like the test vote for impeachment, true, and very interesting. And then we saw something very troubling in which Pat Leahy had a health scare. He's presiding over the impeachment proceedings. He's 80 years old. Apparently, knockwood, and for his sake, he's recovered. It's not entirely clear what happened. He had muscle spasms, I believe. But, then and all of a sudden people started rushing and being like, oh my goodness, like, what's going on in Vermont? Well, we've got a Republican governor who, if gosh, we really don't wish anything bad for Senator Leahy, but if something happens to him, the replacement will be selected by a Republican. Then what does that do to the Senate? So, I mean, we have we're hanging by a thread in terms of, and just to be clear, McConnell and Schumer have not agreed on how they're going to figure out the current division, much less what might happen with Leahy.
The great irony here is that the last time we had a 50-50 Senate, which is in 2000 election going into 2001, you had a brief power sharing agreement for several months, and then that agreement fell apart when what happened? Republican Senator Jim Jeffords decaucused from the Republicans, declared himself independent, and caucused with the Democrats, switching the power. So it would be, God help us, if something happens to Pat Leahy, but it would be incredibly ironic if history repeated itself, except in the other direction this time.
It's very true that Chuck Schumer finally, at his pinnacle in his political career that dates back to the mid-70s, has the thinnest majority ever. And he is going to have to fight to hold on to that for the next couple of years. And he faces a lot of challenges. And one of them is the resurgence of Trumpism in the Republican Party. And seeing that Mitch McConnell really wanted to move on from Trump. I mean, he saw the impeachment as a way of kind of purging Trump from the party. And it turns out that it looks more and more like it's going to be the Trumpists who are going to purge non-believers, say, of Trump from the party. You see going after Liz Cheney, you see them going after the 10 Republicans in the House who voted for impeachment. And we haven't seen Trump emerge yet from his silence. Right now, he's pretty silent. I would not be surprised to start seeing him back at rallies over the next several months. And I think that's going to create a real issue there. Now, in terms of Schumer hanging on to the party, he told me they have a Monday evening meeting with his top leadership, which includes everybody from Joe Manchin to Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. And they talk things through and try to hang together. So far, he's been pretty successful. But you're right, if he loses Pat Leahy, it's all over. It's back.
Well, so many things going on and so many possibilities in what you just said there. I mean, one thing that I just want to point out is, even here in New York, where, we consider ourselves pretty progressive, but the reality is that the gradations of progressivism decrease as you go up the Thruway and out towards Western New York, which is actually a bastion more or less of Trump support, with the exception of Buffalo, the city of Buffalo. And then some other areas. But look no further for the divide in the Republican Party than Elise Stefanik. And, the flack that she's been catching for what she decided, to do, which was support him, even despite the vote in terms of despite the January 6th uprising. So, we have a lot of going on there. And I do want to get back also to New York's outsized power in Congress, because we have a lot of New Yorkers who are actually playing a key role in Congress. Chuck Schumer, of course, being the top. And then subsequently, we've got a number of New Yorkers who are headed or have already gone to DC in terms of the Biden administration. But there is a question, and I'm going to give this one to Dave, and he's going to be sad that I've done it. So it's tough. These are questions this is a question, actually there's two of them, but they're along the same vein. Will the media cover Biden differently than Trump? And I think that this is a question that we're hearing a lot, particularly in the Trump camp, the pro Trump camp, which is the media was, outsized in its criticism of him and its, digging of him. And, because the media is perceived as sort of a democratic liberal monolith. And I know, Robert, you're going to have something to say about this too. So hang on for a second. But, we're giving Joe Biden a pass somehow.
So, first, I got to thank you for shouting out Buffalo, New York, my beloved hometown. Go Bills! So can't let that pass.
Go Bills!
Look, I've gotten this question in various forms from friends and colleagues and sources on the right and on the left, and talking about the media monolith. I think it's for anyone who refers to the media and how they covered or how the media covered Donald Trump is a gross oversimplification of the quite literally hundreds, even thousands of different news organizations and tens of thousands of reporters and how they covered the extraordinary experience that was Donald Trump's administration that stood alone relative to all past modern presidencies in the tone, the tenor, the approach to the office, the results, in some cases, the lack thereof. So, we could spend a whole session just on that aspect of it. To your question of, is Joe Biden going to be covered differently by the media? Let me just localize it to myself or our immediate newsroom, just as an example of how we're approaching it. We do a lot of investigative journalism. We do a lot of enterprising journalism. Our goal is to tell people things that they don't know or can't get from other news publications, okay? And in that regard, we're going to cover Joe Biden in one sense, just the way that we cover Donald Trump, which is trying to do exactly what I just described. Tell people things that they don't know about Joe Biden, about his administration, about his goals, about the successes and failures that he's having. And I think if you just simply look at the work that we've done over the past several months, that'll be an indication of our approach to the Biden administration versus the Trump administration. If Joe Biden is doing something that is hypocritical, if he's doing something that contradicts things that he has previously said, if his administration is putting out policies that have great consequence for Americans, which many of them or most of them will, we're going to write about those things. Of course, we're going to write about those things. So I'll stop here with this, and we can continue discussing. But I've heard from a lot of people on the left, you'll write something, or I'll write something that takes Joe Biden to task on a particular issue, and they freak out, like as if, well, Donald Trump, the past 4 years, you can't compare the two. Well, we're not comparing the two. We're doing journalism, which is holding public officials who've been put in a position of authority accountable for their words, their deeds, and their actions. And Donald Trump and Joe Biden can't be compared in many, many ways, but that shouldn't stop journalists, particularly us who are here in Washington, D.C., from doing the kind of core calling of our job is political reporters or governmental reporters, which is still going forward and holding them accountable. That's a critical aspect, and we're going to continue to do that.
Robert, you want to jump in?
Well, I was going to say that obviously there will be the media, broadly speaking, will cover Joe Biden differently than Donald Trump, because Donald Trump was a different animal from the start. He launched in a way trying to destroy whatever the common political consensus was in 2015, 2016 on things like trade and immigration and so forth. And there was sort of like a something of an institutional pushback towards that. 1 or 2 days into the Biden administration, this might have been last Thursday or Friday, one of his advisors made a comment that the administration was basically, like, quote, starting from scratch when it came to dealing with vaccine distribution and so forth. And it became pretty clear early on that he was sort of not being completely truthful in that assessment. Now, if this had been the Trump administration, there would have been a huge kind of uproar, and the thing just sort of kind of faded, sort of faded away. There wasn't a lot of follow up in the press conferences afterwards. And in a sense, that's fine, because all presidents, all new administrations tend to get something of a honeymoon. But the fact is, Biden has sold himself as something of a return to normalcy. In other words, what people expect from a government, from a president, is going to be going closer to the model, the pre-Trump model. You're not going to have chaos and Twitter streams, every 5 minutes or so. But the flip side of that is that the broad media is going to expect results. It's going to say that you promised this today. Why isn't that coming forward? A week, 2 weeks, a month afterwards. So in a sense, there's going to be a higher standard for competency that the media will expect out of Biden.
Can I add this, though? There's a total change in how the White House is approaching its handling of the press.
Okay.
I can recall we have 7-day coverage. My colleague Laura Figueroa Hernandez and I split it so that we have 7-day coverage. And I can remember one of my first Saturdays working, Trump accused Obama of wiretapping and spying on him. And it was such a shock to hear this, because I had covered the Justice Department. The president cannot order a wiretap. That's what the whole FISA Act was all about, is to kind of regulate that whole thing. But it just showed what a difference it was. But now you have Jen Psaki holding daily briefings, which Trump stopped because he wanted to run the entire show. So you're going to have this multi-layered presentation of what the Biden administration is trying to accomplish through a whole different set of avenues. And I think that's going to make a difference in the coverage. But I do want to go back to what Dave was saying. I do think that after this period of a couple of weeks, maybe months, probably a couple of weeks though, that reporters are going to start looking at the Biden administration like they look at any administration. Right now, everything has rolled out very, very slowly. Usually you have, by this point, the entire cabinet, the key players in the cabinet already confirmed. We're still doing it because it was such a slow start. And so there hasn't been the same level of scrutiny, because there's just too much going on to just focus on one thing.
Well, actually, if I could just quickly jump in, Tom, I would slightly disagree with you in this. While it's true that the appointments and the confirmations have been somewhat slow, Biden, in the context of, say, executive actions and so forth, there's been 40 of them, which is more than his 6 predecessors combined in that. So that's a whole lot of executive action that the media, in a sense, is in a sort of playing catch up on, trying to figure out all the implications of them. So in that sense, it's very fast in terms of the administration flooding the zone, making it harder for the media to kind of catch up with it.
Well, so that's an interesting point. And there's also, and I want to go back to something that Tom said, it strikes me as, and again, let's just be clear, I'm not covering this White House, so I defer to the experts. I'm just sort of watching as a regular person now, as a consumer of media. But so I guess I would say, it seems to me, though, that we're sort of reverting back to what I would consider a more traditional White House. So one of the things that we saw from the president was, the former president, pardon me, is that he really relied heavily on social media to circumvent the press and bring his message directly to the public. And it strikes me, for example, one of the many executive orders that Robert just referenced, that Joe Biden has been churning out sort of like with this incredible speed, in part because of so much was accomplished by the previous administration via executive order. He's seeking to undo a lot of that. And also, remember, he's got this division in Congress. So to try and get something done by statute takes a long time and will be taking double the time, given the fact that the Senate can't even figure out how to govern itself right now. He undid the transgender ban for the military, for example. And the way that he did it was, he was in the Oval Office, flanked by an historic defense secretary, who's the first African-American to ever hold that post, Fort Drum, just another New York shout out there, but because I have to. But in all seriousness, the way that the previous president announced that he would be reversing that ban from reversing the administration prior to his, which was the Obama administration, he did it by tweet. He actually enacted policy on Twitter, which is not something that I think we're going to see from the Biden White House. I mean, and again, you should correct me if you think that I'm wrong, but thus far, the indication is not that Joe Biden is going to be, wildly tweeting without, just and having his own cabinet members and administration play catch up subsequently to his announcements.
I don't expect that at all, Liz. I think this is going to be through the kind of more, the norm that existed before Donald Trump, that it's going to be done through selective leaks to certain publications, particularly the New York Times and Washington Post, and it's going to be done through statements at the podium in the press room at the White House. And, Biden, picking up on Robert's point, Biden is really trying to show that he's going to do a lot. And the fact is with partisanship the way it is, and the narrow margin that Democrats have, is that there's not going to be much legislation. It's going to be very hard to get that legislation through. So Biden is trying to stake out what he can do. And I mean, this has gone on since the Obama administration. Remember Obama's famous, I've got a phone and I've got, a pen. And that's exactly what Trump did. And that's what Biden's going to do. And you're right, Robert, that flood of things that Biden has put out has been very important. But who's had time to really examine all the steps that he's taken? And that's going to be, I think, a great, minefield for him when we see how that plays out.
Well, so that actually plays into another question that I think is important. And this is one that actually, to be honest, informed my frustration with my former profession. It became, to me, just a constant reaction and regurgitation of information that was like drinking from a fire hose. And the news cycle now is not, I'm old enough to remember when we had like deadlines of, 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock and then 7 o'clock. Now it's like, there are no deadlines. It's a 24-hour cycle, as you mentioned, Tom. You have to be running constantly to catch up. And as a result, in my opinion, and Dave, if you would weigh in, we'll start with you. The quality of journalism it really is hurt by that. And to your point, you have to make a conscious decision, as your publication seems to have done. We are not going to do the horse race day-to-day crazy. We are going to dedicate a certain segment of our resources in our newsroom, which are dwindling, generally speaking, because of just the nature of the contraction of the business, to doing our own investigation so we can bring informed information to readers. You need to slow down and take a breath. And not a lot of news organizations have the luxury of being able to do that.
Yeah, and I think that journalism in ways has declined and in ways improved just by the nature of technology. If you're a reader, if you're a consumer of news, you are sometimes getting crappier news, for lack of a better way of saying it, because it's so piecemeal, so incremental, coming in from so many different angles, being, sent via tweet, via Facebook message. There's no, kind of daily sit down at the breakfast table ritual that you'll go through to get your news and sit down in the evening news. I mean, those days are so long gone. But on the other hand, too, people are also able to get information in real time with such speed, with such efficiency, that they're just getting a lot more than they would otherwise, which can be a very healthy thing for democracy in certain ways in its own right. Insider here, we didn't have a DC bureau until 8 months ago. And now we have 8 reporters or 8 journalists who part of the bureau. We're going to have more than a dozen probably within another month or two. And that was because of a concerted decision to have a unit that just kind of did enterprise and investigative work and produced scoops. So, that was a decision that our news organization has made. And I hope many news organizations that have the resources to do it make in order to focus on the meaty, substantial, substantive news that people really need. We have an entirely different unit that deals with breaking news and all that kind of stuff. One point, and just very quickly, that I think is important is that when trying to cover the Biden administration versus trying to cover the Trump administration, one very kind of basic blocking and tackling technique that I use and many reporters use is just comparing what has been said and comparing a political agenda with the realities of where things stand in the months and years after that has been initiated and put forth. I mean, with Donald Trump, his platform in a very real way could be boiled down to 3 or 4 words, 3 words being drain the swamp and 4 words being make America great again. And that's what it was. I wrote a story several years ago looking at Donald Trump's actual platform and what it said. I mean, it was filled with platitudes and non-specifics, and you really couldn't hang anything on it. Joe Biden, in contrast, has, for better or for worse, an incredibly detailed agenda that he put out throughout his campaign, is detailed now in his nascent administration. So as reporters, we're able to, kind of use that template that Biden himself has put forward to say, all right, well, you've achieved this, you've achieved that, and you haven't achieved that, and you haven't achieved that. And then we can discuss why that is the case. Is it because of political gridlock? Is it because the Biden administration has deprioritized something it promised to be a priority? The game is so different. With Donald Trump, it was just reactive oftentimes because there was no real starting point. It was what Donald Trump was tweeting. It was what Donald Trump was saying. It was so ephemeral, and it was so just completely off the cuff and not rooted in any kind of unified grand theory of what Donald Trump's administration was beyond sloganeering in a very real way.
I'd like to pick up. I think Dave has actually done some nice stories recently that have been deeply looking into some of the things that both the Trump phenomenon and the incoming Biden administration. So kudos to you.
Thanks.
Here at Newsday, we're trying to move away. Laura and I are trying to move away from doing just pure daily coverage to doing step back stories where we can dig a little bit deeper, explain things. I think we're going to be heading in that direction of doing more enterprise work. And we've been doing that for a while, and I think we're going to continue to do that. But I would just like to take one other thing, and I know it takes us in a slightly different direction. But the single biggest story is, will Biden be able to competently handle the pandemic? It's just been such a disaster. The whole country is in total thrall to this pandemic. It only seems to be getting worse. There's just news out this morning that the economy shrunk, 3.5%. I mean, this is huge. And his administration the make or break point is, can he tame the pandemic? And can he get the economic reality recharged over, he's got about a year to do it. He doesn't have much more than that. And that's going to determine the entire future of politics going forward.
Right, we haven't really, so that's a good point, Tom, is that we haven't really touched on that. I mean, I think in terms of the overarching, things that will be driving the Biden administration, it's definitely, what's happening from the political standpoint, and then subsequently what's happening from the public health standpoint. And there's a lot of criticism of how the previous administration handled the pandemic, perhaps shunted aside reports and recommendations on how to proceed did not actually manage to get a vaccine program up and running, leaving it to the states, which has left us with this situation that we have now. So I guess my question to you, Robert, to sort of continue along this vein is, Joe Biden has given himself, I think, 100 days to inoculate whatever it is, 1 million people, right? And how long does he have?
100 million, yeah, 100 million, yeah, over,
right.
yeah.
How long does he have to turn this ship around? 100 days seems to me to be like too long. Like, he really has to demonstrate movement in a positive direction in a month, maybe. I'm not saying he has to inoculate 100 million people in a month, just demonstration that there's something that has changed, and the numbers are looking good, but we have these new variants now.
Right.
So, and they're more infectious and perhaps more deadly, and new information is coming out every single day. And, we have experts trying to, and vaccine distributors and vaccine creators trying to figure it out. And it's an international problem.
I think he does have. I think he does have 100 days because the media is in love with that 100 days poetry and so forth. But I think the key thing is, and this is something that made Biden stand out during the campaign, and I think it carries over into his administration, is he is trying to act normal. He's trying to be. He's even though he's putting out all these executive orders, his administration is disciplined. They stay on message. The Trump administration. I've got some friends who worked in the administration, broadly speaking. But it was difficult for them to act in a professional, disciplined manner because the man at the top would say one thing one day and then tweet out something that completely contradicted that the next day. You're not going to see that with the Biden administration. That is something I think that they will, so that the public will give him latitude on. The one exception on that, and we're seeing a little bit of tension on that in the last few days on that, is the question of schools. There is a tension between Joe Biden saying he wants the schools to reopen within 100 days. You're seeing public teachers unions pushing back in a number of different places, most notably in Chicago, but even close by New York in terms of Montclair, New Jersey, where there is reluctance, if not hostility, to restarting 100% in class learning, or even hybrid learning, because Biden is identified as being a friend of the teachers union, because Dr. Jill Biden is a teacher herself. There is a sort of grassroots kind of frustration amongst the public that the schools can't reopen earlier, particularly given that the levels of transmission are incredibly minimal in the schools. So that may be one notable stumbling block where the public's patience with Biden is not going to be unlimited.
In terms of, I'm sorry, Tom, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, what are the metrics that, as journalists, we should be looking for to determine how successful Biden's, initiatives on COVID, on schools, and that sort of thing? What would you suggest for that, Dave and Robert? What do you think? The metrics for his success. What are you looking for?
Well, for my part, there's several metrics that I think certainly we're paying attention to, but that the public also should itself be paying attention to. First of all, legislative success. This is a results-oriented business, and if Joe Biden is able to get forward agenda items and get them through Congress and put them into law in some form or fashion, then that obviously is critical. On the flip end to that, or the other side to the coin, if you will, is if he's unable to do that because of it being blocked. If Republicans and Democrats can't get together, then that's where you really need some very deep, kind of exploratory and explanatory journalism that gets into the reasons why, because that's critical. People need to know when you're dealing with something that quite literally is a true life and death scenario, when we have more than 400,000 Americans who have died as a result of COVID-19, you have to hold people to account, and you have to hold people responsible for decisions that they're making that can affect the trajectory of governmental programs and initiatives that will mean the difference between, quite potentially, people getting what they need or people not getting what they need to be healthy, to be safe, to be educated, as we just talked about, and all the various other elements that factor into COVID-19. That's just COVID-19. There are plenty of other issues too that I think the same basic principle can apply to. But I think that's one illustration of the approach journalistically that in the metrics that can be used to explain what is going on here in Washington, D.C. that has reverberations all across the country.
And we're also going to see over the next month or so how much President Biden is going to try and jam into what's referred to as the budget reconciliation process. That's the one area where a president and administration has leeway in terms of getting some controversial spending and tax items, but not exclusively spending and tax items, passed with only 51 votes, which is basically what the Democrats have in the Senate with Vice President Harris's tiebreaker. There obviously the big ticket items are that $1.9 trillion package that the president is pushing through, but that includes things that are not necessarily seen as pure budget items, like $15 minimum wage, which is definitely falls into a gray area as to whether you can get that into budget reconciliation. And another area is an infrastructure plan. Is that also going to be part of the budget reconciliation package too? You know, it's a really big ticket item, and I imagine that Biden will talk about that in his well, it's not the State of the Union. I guess it's his financial address to the nation coming up sometime in February, and that'll be an early test, or an early opportunity for the media and the public to grade him as to how effective he is in pushing his agenda through.
And I would just quickly add to that we're going to have sort of like the return of the porkometer. And what I mean by that is that pork used to be this thing in government where bills would get loaded up with, this project or that
items,
project.
The return of member items.
Right.
Exactly. And earmarks, which were also a thing in the past, are no longer a thing the way that they used to be. But I think, Robert, it's an incredibly important point to note that if Joe Biden's going to get some of his big ticket agenda items done, it's not going to be by going through the front door of Congress. It's not going to be through just by using the sheer force of political power to get it through the Senate. They just don't have the votes. There's not going to be enough Republicans who go along with the Democrats in order to get many of the real big marquee type things of the Biden agenda item to go through. So getting back, Tom, to the notion of metrics, that's one thing that needs to be very, very closely monitored and measured, is all the different add-ons that are going to be glommed onto sort of must-pass bills, or bills that aren't going to be able to be filibustered in the same way that your Schoolhouse Rocks type style bill is going to go through the legislative process. So you're talking about, the spending bills, the omnibus bills, types of stuff like that, where lots of surprises and goodies. If they're going to happen, they're probably going to happen there. So yeah, let's make sure that the score sheet is very, very carefully monitored when it comes to those things.
I think it's going to be particularly true about the infrastructure bill. I think that'll be like a candy store for everybody.
Yeah.
That's passed. For this reconciliation, there's a concept of extraneous matters that automatically get knocked out by the parliamentarian. or can be challenged by any member of the House or Senate. So I don't know, that may be a streamlined kind of project. But anyway, I'm sorry, Liz, go ahead.
Well, no, I mean, I was going to say, when we talk about metrics, there are some things that are more difficult to measure than others. I mean, some of what we're talking about here are like budget bills. We're talking about numbers and, what's tucked in for a little pet project for the Bridge to Nowhere or the Cheese Museum or whatever have you. The Cheese Museum is a state joke. It actually does exist. But anyway, so the point, though, is that some of these other things that Biden has tried to bake into his agenda are more difficult. How do you measure whether social equity and his efforts to address the racial divisions that have riven this country are successful?
That's always, I mean, that's a tough call. I mean, he had, I say today's Thursday. I guess I think this is Tuesday. Trying to, get all these things. I think Tuesday was racial equity racial equity day, and so he rolled out 4 executive orders and focusing on that. That's a tougher metric. I mean, this administration, probably even more so than the Obama administration, I should say this president, even more so than the previous Democratic president, has made the makeup of his cabinet and his administration a real conscious effort to use that phrase of to look like to look like America. After after 2020, which was focused on issues of race and inclusion and bias and things like that, a president who owed his success both in the primary and in the general, and in terms of the Senate as well, to Black voters, that base is going to want to see some tangible results. That may result. Joe Biden has promised that that he will appoint a Black woman to the Supreme Court. There's a lot of push amongst progressives for Stephen Breyer to announce his retirement yesterday, and so that's going to be there's going to be a lot of pressure on the president to fulfill that promise as well. So that's another metric to take a look at.
And I would also say that the journalists operating at the local and the regional level have a big job for them. And in terms of metrics, they're going to be the ones who are going to be telling the stories of the effects of decisions being made at the federal level in their own communities. And as we know from politics writ large, and definitely during the Trump administration, that decisions that affect New York in one way may affect South Dakota or Nebraska or Texas or California or Hawaii in very, very different ways. So, here we are in a situation where local media is shrinking, where publications that existed 10 or 15 or 20 years ago don't exist today, or in only skeletal fashion relative to what they used to do. But nevertheless, the need is still so very much there in so many communities. And I think it's also an opportunity for growth and, an opportunity for especially nonprofit news organizations to grow and to be supported and to spring up. I can think of organizations such as the Texas Tribune, based in Austin, Texas, that didn't exist about 10 years ago and now employs about 100 journalists who cover politics and policy in the state of Texas. There are other analogs in California and Florida and elsewhere throughout the country. I'm expecting big things from local and state-based nonprofit news organizations to call balls and strikes on the Biden administration, to tell the stories of national decisions and how they affect localities. That's going to be absolutely critical from a journalistic standpoint in determining whether Joe Biden's administration is being successful, because if you're not telling the stories of the effects and only telling the stories of the decisions, then you're missing half the story.
Dave, you raised a really great point there. One of the biggest obstacles we live in, one of the biggest obstacles we face in the divided country that we're in right now is what sort of information the public accepts or believes. And a lot of the things that Biden is trying to roll out, and I think this is definitely going to be true in whatever the infrastructure package he puts together, is actually going to be targeted towards rural areas, towards so-called, either red states or red sections in blue states, like say upstate New York and so forth. The question is, even if he is successful, and even if the administration has data and metrics to show the success at rolling out projects and creating jobs there, the question is, will the people within those states recognize or accept the numbers that are actually will they accept the reality that's out there? Trump obviously is no longer on Twitter, so he's not exactly able to obscure the reality of what's actually going on. But what we've learned over the last few years is that a large segment of the country just refuses to believe the information that is coming from mainstream media, and that's something that even though Biden will not be tweeting as much, that's a reality that he's going to have to accept.
Well, part of the answer is no. That some segments of the population, some Americans, are just simply not going to believe anything that the Biden administration has to say. Just like some Americans just simply wouldn't believe anything that the Trump administration would have to say. Now, you can argue the reasons for that, or whether it's a true fair comparison. And I think there's a fair case to be made that no, it's not. But nevertheless, the bottom line is that some Americans are just not going to trust certain news sources, no matter what they do, no matter what the truth of the matter is.
And I'm just quickly say, just keep in mind, you've got 70 or 80% of Trump voters don't even accept Biden as a legitimate president. So that's another huge barrier he has to overcome too.
But that should not stop for a second, and that should not dissuade for a moment news organizations from seeking the truth, from finding facts, from gathering information, from analyzing that information, from doing original reporting, from being enterprising in the way that they do that reporting, and to publish things that are going to be big and important, and that people should read, and that hopefully is also going to get picked up by a wide swath of media in general, from all points of the spectrum, or no point at all. I wrote a story last night that got widely cited in, Fox News, the Daily Caller, a lot of, right of center type media. It just so happened to be about Dianne Feinstein. Okay. And I only bring that up to say that I can attest to the fact that this is totally, completely fact-based, fair, as down the middle reporting as you can. And it got picked up because, well, they want to beat up on Dianne Feinstein, but still, like, the core of the reporting is still there. I've read other stories where the left, will do the same thing, and the Talking Points media and the Daily Koses of the world, and it will do the same thing. So you can't control that, but I can control my work. Any reporter and news organization can, to a great extent, usually control the work that they do and the decisions that they make. So that is still important, and you can't lose sight of the reason why you do good, fair journalism in the first place. If you do, then that's where you lose your compass and you go awry. And I would hope that many news organizations will resist that just for the purposes of expediency.
So unfortunately, we're almost out of time, but I do want to note that Dave makes a good point about the media echo chamber that we seem to have now, in part because we have so much more aggregation and regurgitation, as opposed to independent and creative and reporting that comes from whole cloth, which is unfortunate. But I do want to say, in our last 5 minutes, and I'll put this to each of you as a sort of to close things out, other than Joe Biden, other than the usual suspects, Biden, Schumer, Trump, Nancy Pelosi, like the people, the headliners, AOC to some degree, right? Because she's getting, who should we be watching because they're going to be interesting newsmakers in the next 12 months? I'll kick it to whoever wants to start.
Well, I don't know. I'll just throw this out there, and this is I don't know if this is a specific person I should address, but Dave kind of hinted at this in our previous discussion. The Democratic leadership is the Democratic Party leadership in Congress and beyond is very, very old. We were talking about Patrick, we were talking about Pat Leahy, and his health could impact the majority in the Senate, and therefore the entire Biden agenda. Dianne Feinstein is old, and there were questions about her health and well, frankly, there were these questions as to whether she should stay in her capacity as the ranking member, actually as the majority chairman, the chairman of her committee. So and we were talking about Stephen Breyer on the Supreme Court as well. So I think that age factor of Democrats is something to keep an eye on, just kind of in the background as over the next couple of years, particularly given the fact that there is a pandemic that kind of targets older people.
Right. Good point.
Okay, so I would suggest that one group to watch. I mean, I'm going to watch all these guys, right? And I think Long Island has some very interesting members of Congress now, particularly from the House. You got somebody on Ways and Means, you have somebody on Energy and Commerce, which are very powerful committees. And then you have Lee Zeldin, who, has some interesting choices to make as he goes forward. But I think looking at this problem solvers caucus, that is trying to bring together to have a centrist approach to things. And it's expanded into the Senate. It's been in the House. It's been kind of written off until last December, when it was the problem solvers who actually ended up kind of stimulating the $900 billion COVID relief package, right? And right now they're trying to work on that as well. And I think it'll be interesting to see that in this time of partisanship, to see how far they can go. Frankly, history tells us it doesn't have a whole lot of hope. But then on the other hand, it was kind of like, the Gang of Eight that brought the 2013 Senate immigration bill, the only thing passed since, I don't know, 96. So that is something to watch, I think.
For me, it's not even in Washington, D.C. It's governors, state governors. And so much of the action on the COVID distribution front, from the health and safety front, from the education front, Washington, of course, will have their say in the way that Washington has it, but it's going to be the Andrew Cuomo's of New York, and the Ron DeSantis's of Florida, and the Greg Abbotts of Texas, and the Kristi Noems of South Dakota, and so on and so forth, that are putting this into action or making executive decisions in their own part of the United States that will have a profound effect on the residents of those states. And one thing that is very difficult to do in journalism is to compare the 50 states amongst themselves, or compare and contrast the experiences there. We've seen a lot of very good work around COVID, and a lot of work a lot of data that can be measured. But that's critical, because if you live in a state that's just making bad decisions, or decisions that are affecting you in a negative way, where decisions are being made in the state next door in a way that's really helping people, journalists need to be present and engaged in that type of comparative reporting, so that when things go south and things go wrong, they can be fixed by doing comparisons that are clear and worthwhile and understandable, so that those problems can get better, especially again when we are dealing with a very life and death and health and safety types of situations here.
Well, I'm going to hand it off to our folks who are hosting. I want to thank all of you for a lively discussion. I expected nothing less, so you lived up to expectations. I don't know what the metrics. I don't know what the metrics are for measuring success, but I thank you so much for your time and over the past 60 minutes. It's been good to share some moments with you virtually.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks everyone for coming.
Yeah,
My
good seeing
pleasure.
you.